Yesterday we spoke quite a bit about free enterprise and how free enterprise is a concept in American history that really is one of the principles of our entire government and system. Remember what we spoke about yesterday in terms of free enterprise allowing businesses to operate freely without any type of intervention from government. Now we know that that doesn't exist in its pure form, and there's always some intervention. But the question we want to explore today is how much intervention should government actually have when they get involved in business? What we're going to do is we're going to explore a time period in American history between 1865 and 1914. And we're going to look at two viewpoints. The first viewpoint we're going to look at is the viewpoint of big business. The other viewpoint we're going to look at is the viewpoint of the American worker. We have to remember that big business did a tremendous amount for America. Between that time period of 1865 to 1914, gross national product skyrocketed. As a matter of fact, between 1874 and 1883, it skyrocketed up 34%. There were new power sources developed during this time period. Electricity, petroleum. We learned to mass produce steel, which allowed us to expand and trade. We developed the automobile, telephone and telegraph, the electric light bulb, water and sewage for cities, public transportation, great wealth for many Americans, and a wide variety of consumer goods. For many Americans, they were living the high life. And this progress came about because of free enterprise. This progress came about when there was little, if any, restrictions on what businesses could do. For many, it was a great time. For others, such as the American worker, the American immigrant, it was quite a different story. During the same time period, immigrants flooded America, and they flooded the cities for work. The average American worker in the city were making low wages and working in atrocious working conditions. In 1900, for example, 1.7 million people were working full-time. Those 1.7 million people were under the age of 16 years old, like yourselves. Think about that for a second. 1.7 million people under the age of 16 working full-time. That's illegal now. You can't do that. Working conditions for women were also terrible. The Triangle Fire that took place in 1911 ended up with 150 women jumping to their deaths because the Triangle Company refused to spend the extra money to provide a safe working conditions. Those conditions which were, of course, or should have been, fire safe. It wasn't uncommon for the average person to work 56 hours, 6 days a week. Overtime and Sundays, no pay. Wages in the garment district were as low as $6 a week. Employers were so cruel at times, and not all employers, but some employers were so cruel at times that people caught talking, singing, or smoking would receive fines. An example of how bad it did get without government restriction can be seen in Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle. Upton Sinclair writes in his book, The Jungle, about the meatpacking industry and the condition that workers were forced to work under. This is an example from Upton Sinclair's book. Cut up by the 2,000 revolutions a minute flyers and mixed with half a ton of other meat. No odor, that ever was in a ham could make any difference. There would come all the way back from Europe old sausage that had been rejected and that was moldy and white. It would be dosed with borax and glycerin and dumped into the hoppers and made over again for home consumption. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor, in the dirt and sawdust, where the workers had trampled and spit uncounted billions of consumption germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in the room, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it. And thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of dried dung of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together. The man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat, even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. There was no place for the men to wash their hands before they ate their dinner, and so they made a practice of washing them in the water that was ladled into the sausage. Under the system of rigid economy which the packers enforced, there were some jobs that it paid only to do once in a long time, and among them was cleaning out the waste barrels. Every spring they did it. And in the barrels would be dirt and rust and old nails and stale water. And cartload after cartload of it would be taken up and dumped into the hoppers with fresh meat and sent out for the public's breakfast. That's just an example of what businesses can do. Not that they always do, but what they can do if there is no regulation and there is no restriction. What you need to do is keep in mind that how much do we restrict business? How much do we regulate? Thankfully to Upton Sinclair's book, the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed. That's an example of government regulation. But remember, government regulation can go too far, and businesses can lose profits and not make money, and that leads to lower economic growth, layoffs, possibly low wages. What we're going to do is we're going to have a debate, and in our debate, I'm going to split the class into two sides. One side will argue for government regulation of business in the 90s, and the other side will argue against government regulation. So we will prepare this debate tomorrow